Oh la 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 bamba. Oh la 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 bamba. Oh la 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 bamba. Oh la 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 big it up. Oh la 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 big it up. Oh la 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 bamba. Bir baba bamba bir bamba de. Bir baba bamba bir bamba de. Bir baba bamba bir bamba bir bamba de. Bir baba bamba.
Welcome to this episode of Home and Away Jamaica, the program that talks about real estate and all the different aspects, but in particular, targeting the diaspora. During the last program, we talked about the importance of making a will, and we talked about the reasons why people don't want to make a will, all the superstitions, etc., surrounding that. So in this particular episode, we're going to be speaking to Beverly East, who is a forensic document examiner. So the topic of the program today is how to prevent fraud of wills and estates. So my name is Paulette Price. I'm a real estate broker, and I'm co-presenting with my colleague,
Robert Taylor, attorney at law, Jamaica. Thanks, Paulette.
Thank you. So, and we want to welcome Beverly East. Beverly.
Good morning.
Good morning, or good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. So I wanted to start off by asking you, what is the best way for individuals to prevent fraud of wills and estate? What should individuals be considering?
Individuals should consider, anywhere in the world where they are, that when they have written their will, that the original is not inside their home. The original will should be with the lawyer, in the lawyer's office, or somewhere else. Because what happens is somebody within the family, and this is not all families, but a large proportion of my work is working on will and testament. Somebody gets hold of that original will and tampers with it. They either recreate a page within the will, they change the signature, they add contents that wasn't originally a part of the will. So if they don't have access to the original will, then it cuts down the ability to tamper with it and change it.
So when do people really realize that there's something wrong with the will?
Usually when a will is being read, it really shouldn't come to a surprise to anybody who's close to that person. So the person who has deceased has already probably said verbally, you know, when I die, this goes to you, this goes to you. And then when the person gets the will, it's nothing to what may have been discussed or may not have been the wish of the individual. So, and then within families, sometimes there are members within the family and not happy with other members in the family, so they just decide to recreate the will. A lot of my work comes, as I said, from will and testament, and it's either siblings within the family or little baby mama drama. So you might have a first wife, second wife, and the second wife might be trying to exclude the children from the first marriage. So it's, you know, it's one of two things. Currently, I have a will right now, which is of a deceased man, and he had two women with two sets of children, and he wrote a will to both of them. So it's not exactly fraud, but it's just who got the most.
Okay.
Yeah, who got the who got the most up to date will. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So how do they settle that then? How would they settle that?
Well, I'm involved in that one, and so it's not just about the signature. The signature on the will is fine. So we now have to take it to an examiner that deals with ink analysis to see what period the ink hit the paper, because it's both the same year. So, and the same month. So it's basically, when did the ink hit the paper, arrive on the paper?
All right. So in other examples then, where it is fraud,
Yes.
like, can you give us an idea of what's the worst case scenario you've ever seen, and how did that come about? How did it get settled? Does the person who commit the fraud get punished even?
No, never. I mean, even now, well, it's not the will, but if you look at the Manchester municipal fraud case that happened most of last year in the press, they will probably appeal. The sentencing is coming in July. But say, for instance, one of the big cases I worked on was the Cox and Dodd will. And the judge ruled in favor of my client, which was the son of Cox and Dodd. And the mother and the sister had been involved. One of them had been involved. Nobody went to prison with that. And then the mother died, and then my client died. So it's still unresolved.
Okay.
But it surprises me how many will and testament cases come through my office on a monthly basis. And I just feel with the COVID happening now, it's going to even be more involved, because there's so much distraction with all what's going on that, you know, people are not keeping their eye on the prize and looking at the things that they should. You're concerned about your health, but I also feel you should be concerned about your estate and your welfare, your well-being financially.
So where's the best place to start? Because people have estate in multiple countries at the same time. So, you know, sometimes they've got properties in, let's say you're in the UK, you have property in Jamaica, you have property in, say, another country. And sometimes, you know, I've heard stories where somebody dies and they don't even tell their family that they've got multiple properties. So,
well, this is the thing. You just have to make sure that someone who you trust, you go to a lawyer and you sit down with that lawyer, and everything that you own, it's written down somewhere outside home. Because people die all the time. I have a friend and her mother died, and her mother had property in Spain, and she didn't know that. She didn't know that. But because the will had been written properly and executed properly,
right.
The documents was in one place. You know, I believe that, you know, her situation will be resolved easily, but sometimes it takes years, especially if, you know, we are all over the diaspora. We are in Canada, UK, United States, and a lot of us have property outside of our home, outside of where we actually live in. So there's a lot of property in Jamaica that just sits there, and the community knows that it belongs to somebody else. Quietly take their time and move in and build house on it, and then the next, it's hard to get them off.
Yeah. So if you were speaking to somebody who was just coming up in, you know, building their property portfolio, what would you tell them to do? How would you set like an A to B, C list of
ABC.
Yes.
Everything that you own and have, make sure somebody else knows about it other than your immediate family. So for instance, you might buy a property in Jamaica, a little apartment in a complex, you know, as soon as you acquire something, you have to update your information that is a part of your will, or whoever your estate is going to. It needs to be addressed and listed and given to somebody else outside of your family situation. Even if it is going back to your family if you die, but somebody else outside, and what we call an objective person. An objective person a neutral person outside of your family.
Right. Robert, do you have anything to add?
No, I think, Beverly, you've given some really astute advice. I think what I'm hearing you say, it's important that persons engage professionals. I think very often there is this resistance to go to an attorney or a solicitor because of this simplistic view that the cost, it may be too costly. But in the end, when you don't, it, certainly the consequences that are born are far wider than, the cost of seeing a solicitor attorney, which in this case, the costs are fairly minimal. And so I think the advice of having that third party doing the will, having it actually executed in the solicitor or attorney's office, ensures that the will is validly executed. In Jamaica, Section 6 of our Wills Act speaks to how a will should be executed. So the testator or testatrix, if it's a woman, needs to sign at the foot of the will. The will must be witnessed by two parties together in the same room, and the will must be in writing. So, many times writing a will and having it executed can be a very simple process. It doesn't need the involvement of a solicitor or attorney, but certainly if you, particularly where you have a portfolio of assets that could be at risk, you want to make sure. So you get that advice. So I take that point. But one of the questions I wanted to ask you, you spoke about will tampering. What about, and how prevalent are the incidences where there's no will, but the intended or perceived intended beneficiaries say, rather than having this go to letters of administration and the state having to appoint a trustee, why not let's get together, let's collude, we know what mom or dad's intention was, let's prepare a will and sign the way we know dad or mom was.
Well,
How much have you seen?
I have never experienced family agreeing so easily because everybody wants a different amount or think they're entitled to a different amount. So I've never seen a will, I've never examined a will where a family has colluded and created a will. It's usually one side of the family against the other side of the family, a stepchild, a stepmother. There's always somebody else. So the wills that I'm looking at, it's never amicable where somebody has created a will within each other, within the family. It's usually, I never get the house in Spanish Town. Oh, well, let me just rewrite this and change it.
Yeah.
So, and sometimes some of the wills, I honestly admit, I tell people all the time, Jamaica had become my best training ground. I was already experienced, an expert, thought I was an expert, and then I came to the Caribbean. I had to rewind and come again because some of the wills and some of the documents that I looked at, they were so well executed. You would believe as an expert, you would know the difference. And it would take me the longest time to work out what's different. If somebody's bringing it to you, I always say, there's no smoke without fire. I've got to find, you already see the smoke, I have to find the fire. And sometimes I would spend hours going over and over and over the will. For instance, the Cox and Dodd will, for instance, the signature was correct. There was nothing wrong with his signature. All they did was changed one of the pages and initialed over whatever they were trying to change. But the probate will, the will that was with the probate, did not have that change. So that's why I'm saying when the original will is outside of the home and somewhere else, whatever was created was not the same will with the changes.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So we're good. We're very good. We're very good at fraud.
Mhm. So that's just emphasized the importance of keeping the will outside of the home, somewhere else. So that's really
Somewhere
important.
else.
Yeah, and
Somewhere
that's
else.
why probating is also important. Yeah. So,
Yeah, but I also want to say that, you know, you should, just because you've written a will doesn't mean that's it. If things change for you and you get some inheritance from somewhere else and your portfolio changes and you buy another piece of property, or you know, you get another piece of property somewhere, you must always upgrade and change and add or delete. You might fall out with somebody, don't want to give them what you wanted to give them. So you must always look at that will again, like every 4 years, every 5 years. In a year, something could change.
yes. I remember hearing that Oprah Winfrey rewrites her will almost every year because people come
Yeah, well,
in and out of her life.
I yeah, I think her probably her portfolio probably changes every 6 months. But
Yes.
I
Yeah.
just wish I was which one of. I just always wish I was one of those South African children that she had adopted.
Excellent.
Paulette, we should also add that marriage also invalidates any prior will. So
Oh
if
yes,
someone
thank you for that,
remarries,
Mr. Taylor. Thank you for that, Mr. Taylor. Yes, that's
yeah, yeah,
saying that second wives always come a crop because whatever was already in place for the children, they always feel that they need to exclude the children. But isn't it when you are married, as you say, it dismisses anything else that's been written?
correct. And so one of the areas of contention and litigation is, well, firstly, there's a presumption that the testator's wishes must be carried through. But there are instances where you can rebut that presumption by bringing some evidence to show that could not be his or her intention. And many times what you may find happening is where someone passes but had a first wife, divorced, older children. The children grew up in the matrimonial home, and then the husband remarries, has maybe a new family, has a new wife. But in the will, the former matrimonial home is left to the wife, the current wife. And what that does is displaces the children and the wife who've grown up in this matrimonial home, and it creates a lot of issue and contention.
Yeah, and it also, that's where some of the fraud seeps in, because the new wife feels that she needs to protect herself, so she creates something. She creates something, a will that she believes was discussed with her deceased husband.
And so that is why, certainly we recommend, and in Jamaica we've had the Rights of Spouses Act to deal with this instance. But in the UK, for example, in the right up through the 70s, we had instances, or what we saw in UK law was husbands buying property and not putting the wives on the title. And so you had this concept of overreaching developing in law, where a buyer of property had to have notice, by inspecting the house to see possibly that a woman lived there, that there could be this what we call equitable interest lurking, because a wife may have claim to an interest. And then Lord Denning came about and championed women's rights. So the weight of the law changed in the favor of the wife, that even if the wife was not on the title, but someone looking in from outside could observe that the wife ought to have been on title, then, it displaces that presumption, and a wife included on title. So I think some of those things need to be taken into account. In Jamaica, we have the Rights of Spouses Act, where if a man and woman, both unmarried, live together for a period of more than 5 years, unbroken, uninterrupted, and one party dies, the other party can claim an interest in that property.
I worked on a case once similar to what you are speaking of, and it was family property. And the woman that came to me, her spouse had died. She'd lived 14 years on this property, and the family wanted her out. When I say the family, the siblings wanted her out of the family land.
Yes.
Created a will. And we were able to show, I was able to show that the will had been forged. But I told her that there was 7, she was a tiny little woman, and there were 7 brothers. And she was going to be living around these 7 brothers who didn't want her to be there. So I suggested to her, maybe it wasn't the right thing to do, but I suggested to her, sell the land to the loudest, most awkward person that would give the 7 brothers problems, you know, so like a soul man or somebody that would come with there with animals or goats or something, just to, because before it was just harmonious little area. We're off so badly. So when we won, I says, you can't sleep there. Come and kill you in the night. So I says,
Yeah.
So she sold it. She sold it to some people, which made it worse for the people that were still living there.
Yeah. Psychology.
Having raised that, Beverly, there's also another interesting scenario that can develop in these probate situations. So with a joint tenancy, let's say a husband and wife purchasing property together as joint owners, no one party can will their individual interest to another. It's a right of survivorship. So whoever survives the other takes the property absolutely. But we also have the case of tenancy in common, where parties can agree to a proportionate share. So, you know, one spouse can say, I'll take my interest as a 50% tenancy in common. That tenancy in common can be willed. So what can happen is that someone can end up sharing ownership with an entirely, you know, unknown stranger, because that other tenant in common willed their share. And it's something we also ask, and something we also advise and suggest that persons avoid when purchasing property, unless it's commercial in nature.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. But I just want to say, for those who may be watching this and think it's easy to get away with fraud, you might not end up in prison, but when you are trying to create a signature and you think you can simulate it, there are experts like me that will be able to identify a simulated signature against a genuine signature. So although a lot of people think what they're doing, it's easy, and I just have to do this, and I know, yeah man, I just practice it for a little bit and I will get it right. No, we can find the difference. So it's just a little precaution to those who may be considering.
but it still goes on. So would you say then that the number of fraudsters has risen in the last decade, or because you're out there, you're the one of the rangers out there trying to correct the wrong. So you're obviously catching them, but is there more and more people trying it? Is there
It's more and more people. On an average, will and testament, I mean, I would say on an average, we get a query 3 times a week. 3 times a week. And then they go pick up the money and they come back to us. So, yes, it's in answer to your question, it has increased. Even in terms of my own company, the amount of fraud, not just with will and testament, but the amount of fraud, and I feel as the economy changes, like 2007, when we had the financial crash. There was a lot of fraud 2008, 2009. The same thing will happen after COVID, because as the economy changes, people get desperate. They look for loopholes. Where can I make money? Where can I? And so the desperation comes not because everybody that has defrauded you is an evil person. Sometimes it's just out of desperation. It's not always greed. So yes, my company has increased in terms of its output of work that we do, and not just Jamaica, obviously other Caribbean islands and the UK. But a high percentage of my work and inquiries is will and testament for this week. For this week.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is a lot.
It is a lot. It is a lot. So, and that's just an inquiry. So when you think there's people out there, they haven't made the call yet. So we don't have any COVID cases yet, but I'm preparing my experts and the people that I work with and the people that I'm training. It's coming down. It's coming down the pipe, because no one was really prepared for this COVID-19. What's happened in the last 4 months? A lot of people are suffering. And so from that desperation, I mean, the average person is going to say, I'm going to get through this. I'm going to, but some people is like, you know what? They see a loophole somewhere, a document somewhere. They have an aging mother. They have an aging parent. Yeah, I could do a thing over here, so with this document, nobody gonna know. And because of all the distractions, it kind of scares me that, everywhere you go and you're getting your temperature. I just left Jamaica, so I know what's going on the ground there. So everywhere you go, you got to get your temperature checked, and you got to do this, and you got to do this, and you got to wear a mask, and you got to do this. But are you looking at your documents? When was the last time someone said, let me go back and check my will. Let me go back and check my documents. All my financial papers, are they in order? We're not doing that. We're checking our temperatures, putting on our masks, trying not to get sick, drinking our coconut water, all these kind of things. So I feel like my voice is, please just make sure you have everything in order. I have to check myself. Have I got everything in order? If I was to drop down dead tomorrow, do I have everything in order? And I give you an example. It didn't happen in the Caribbean, but when 9/11 happened, and was issuing money for people who died in New York, death certificates were showing up of people who died in whatever state they died in, and they didn't die in New York, but these death certificates were showing up to get. So if that can happen, in 2001, then just think now what's going to happen with COVID. The amount of people that have died suddenly, all those documentations are out there unaccounted for at the moment. Because I'm sure with all these sudden deaths, there's a lot of people who probably didn't have their documents in order.
That's true. Yeah.
It's going to surface. Those documents are going to surface. Because if I'm doing a steady, and I'm just one examiner, if I'm doing a steady flow of will and testaments outside of COVID, a steady flow, I'm just wondering what's coming down the pipe. People go to Canada to live, or wherever they go to live, they come back to Jamaica to build a little house on a land somewhere, and the land has been transferred to somebody who they don't even know. So to me, it's more about the distraction of where we currently are now. We have to consider, just maybe one weekend, take out all your documents, focus on what you have. Who is it going to? Is it protected? And I just want to touch on dormant accounts, because obviously you can't buy anything without money. So if you have a dormant account, that dormant account, you should make it active. Because some of our internal staff at bankers, hate to say this, You saw it in the press recently, NCB, and I think another bank, where there was inside fraud, internal fraud. If you have a dormant account, just make it active. You know, if it's just sitting there with money in it, never being touched, you just need to make it more active.
Yeah.
Because somebody in the bank who's not so honest sees that loophole and moves the money to another account. So if you're an elderly person who you're in charge of taking care of them, making sure they get their food, their medicine, whatever, if they have an account that they're not using, you need to be aware of where that account is. Not to move not to take the money out, but just to be aware of it, because sometimes people die and the banks don't inform the family that there is an account there.
And they wouldn't really.
No, especially if it's dormant, if it's sitting there for years. And I give you an example. In the UK, this is a personal story. My mom took out an account for my son, and when he was born, and when she wanted to give him this money when he was 21, when he was 18, so it's money going in this account, dormant, not, you know, interest rising. So I go to visit her. They give her an 15-page letter to say the product had been moved. The product doesn't exist anymore. That account that she set up with the interest rate, that product doesn't exist, but this is what you've got now. So they give somebody 87 years old a 13-page, 14-page document to read. She gives it to me, and I'm like, this looked fishy to me. I didn't read all of it because I had worked with another bank where I knew how they were moving this dormant account. So we go to the bank, and what they had done was they had set up another account for her. The interest was different. The money that she originally had was not in this new account. Wow. The interest hadn't been carried over. And because of the work I do, I could confront them. But most people are not aware of it. So it was out that day. But if my mother and I weren't in good speaking terms, she's an old lady that's sitting there with a document that she doesn't understand and doesn't know who to speak to about. And so they'd moved the money, and it was sitting somewhere else, and given her an account with much less money. So 18 years, I'm not good at maths, but 18 years plus the percentage did not account for this money. So when I went there and complained and spoke to them, they were saying they didn't know what. I said, well, it needs to be fixed today. And you know, Miss Paula, I get a little antsy. So they fixed it that day, but was just, they would have because they were trying to get her to come back. I said, she's an 87-year-old lady in a wheelchair. You want her to come back? No, it has to be fixed today. Yeah. You know, and they did. And then when my son turned 21, he got the money. Yeah. You know, but that's just one incident. And this is England. So I know it happens in the Caribbean because that's where I first recognized it, in the Caribbean. So when it happened, Mom was like, oh, I recognize this from St. Kitts. I recognize it from Jamaica. Yeah.
Well, Beverly, I think you're going to have to come back one day and speak to us. There are a lot more instances. I know conveyancing is another area. You spoke earlier of property transfers being done. So I guess that's another area all in itself that we could speak about. I think we've learned quite a bit from having you here today, and we could probably have you on for another hour. Certainly would like to know more about how you develop your craft, the science that's behind it. So I think definitely we'll try and carve some time out at your convenience to have you back with us.
Well, thank you for having me. I could talk about what I do all day because I love it. I love what I do.
Yes, it was a pleasure to have you.
And I think it's a great service that you're providing. Certainly it's one of the areas within the law that needs intervention, external intervention, to make sure that there's equity and parties are, issues are adjudicated in a fair way.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. We're looking forward to seeing you again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
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 Oh la 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 la, bamba. Oh la 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 la, bamba. Oh la 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 la.